Have you been unleashed?
Unleashed.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Horizon Advisors Unleashed podcast. This is Andrew Henricks, back again, your host, here to talk about another lovely, important financial topic. We're going to take it back to the roots today. I'm looking at an article which we'll share. I just got that idea from because it's a lovely tree growing. Because we're going to talk about savings, which hopefully is growing over time for you, if that's a goal. But we're going to focus on this article and really going to touch on a big piece of something that we talk about all the time, and is get a common question, which is typically the way that it's phrased is kind of like, how much should we have in the bank? How much should we have in cash? Sometimes it's, what should our emergency fund be? You know, as much as those are similar questions, they are quite different. Because if you remember, we've done a video before on what's the difference between saving money and what's the difference between investing money, or what's the difference between savings and retirement, right? You can get pretty nitty gritty on all those things. But so we're going to kind of touch on a little bit of all that. And we're also going to focus on, based on the different age groups that you are in, how much maybe you should be saving or how much you should have saved by that time frame. Just as a benchmark. Again, at the end of the day, it's always different for everybody. We say that all the time. But just to get a benchmark, just to get started, we'll start here. So, Ryan, thank you for joining me as always.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome back. I know you love saving, as do I.
It's something I find quite enjoyable.
Yeah, it instills confidence, and it makes you feel good. And again, having that good cash flow and having it stacking away, it feels much better than the opposite. I can tell you that.
Yeah, what I find interesting about this article is, it's a very commonly Googled thing. How much should I have saved by 30, or how much should I have saved by 40? It makes me wonder a little by why people want to know that information. Do they want to know it to see, if they're on track, or do they want to know, if they're either, behind or ahead of their peers?
Yeah, right?
Compared and to maybe make themselves, feel better or worse depending on their situation.
Yeah, comparison is a slippery slope with a lot of things in life, but definitely financial. I know that we're in this constant battle socially to maybe have the nice things or to show off whatever it is. I know that's kind of the thing these days, but we always try to strive against that. And not focusing on other people and just focusing on yourself. Because, again, your situation really is yours, and you are different no matter what it is. You might have some similarities, but at the end of the day, what you want is different. And that'll kind of touch a little bit of the theme today, too. But the article we're referencing is how much should you have in savings at each age. It's from Bankrate.com, and it's written by Matthew Goldberg. We'll share the article in the podcast description. But, again, focusing on kind of age gaps. At different times of your life, different life cycles, ultimately, kind of how you should be saving and what you should be based on, some data that they provide. And they ran a study that showed, based on certain benchmarks. I think it's the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey 2021. Super fancy.
That's a mouthful.
That's a large one. But emergency savings goals are calculated using the average annual expenditure mean for that age group in, that survey basically I just referenced. So that's just coming right from the article. So that's where they're getting this data from. And we're going to go through each phase. I'll kind of start it off just, being in the 20s. I think that's pretty relevant. And then we'll segue off to the older folks over here. But as a baseline, I'm just going to read this just directly from the article. It says, quote, workers often find themselves struggling with how much they should be saving for retirement. While it certainly depends on your situation, experts have general guidelines on what you need to have saved at each stage of your life, end quote. And for example, they say, at least one times, I'll start with the 30th birthday, at least one times your salary by your 30th birthday. So simply put, if you make $100,000, then by your 30th birthday, you should have $100,000 in your retirement account, at least, right? Then we'll go on to the next ones as we go forward. The first thing I wanted to touch on with that savings figure is the emergency fund. Before we get into the savings, I want to break that away again between really, are those the same thing? What's the difference? Essentially, yes, they are the same thing. It's savings. But I like to kind of segue it off versus savings and maybe retirement savings, just because when I think of savings, and you might be different, but when I think of savings, I think about the money that's in the bank. That's what I think of. So like emergency fund would be included in that. When I say retirement savings, that's when I'm looking at 401k, SEP IRA, maybe a brokerage account, but again, that's meant for long term. I'm not trying to pull money from it, those sort of things. That's the main difference.
Yeah, I'd agree. And, some of the problems that we see out there is when people do have emergencies, they look at, all savings the same. Maybe take a loan on a 401k or take money out of an IRA and pay penalty and interest on it. So, I think looking at your different savings in certain ways, retirement's for long term, you don't touch that till retirement. Versus money in a bank is, if something happens or you need to spend money, that's where you go.
Yep. And, for that emergency fund, for that savings, meaning the way that we phrase it, the common benchmark, which again, they do allude to this in this article as well, but the common benchmark, which is what I say to everybody as a starting point, is 3 to 6 months worth of your non-discretionary expenses.
Essential needs.
Yep. So your rent or your mortgage payment would be included in that. Utility bills, the bare minimum of food, right? You need to eat, right? You do need clothes, right? You need, those necessities to live the life that you need. That's your non-discretionary expenses. So
me too. I mean, if I'm planning my emergency, I don't want to scale back if something happens. I want to live my current lifestyle. So, you could look at essential needs, which are some of the things Andrew said, but, you might not want to give up certain things in a tough time. So you got to judge what you're putting into there and what you want that emergency fund to cover. If you lose a job or something like that, having the proper reserves.
Yeah, and that's when you start getting into, again, those other conversations. Okay, maybe you have that in your emergency fund, but then you have other bank accounts, maybe stashed away, high-yield savings, other things. That could also be your emergency fund too, but just as a baseline. If you're single, you can kind of lean more towards the 3 to 4 months. If you're married, you can kind of lean more towards the opposite. Again, might have people say one way or the other.
One income, dual incomes.
Correct. And that's why it changes things because you're supporting two people, things like that. But at the end of the day, that's the bench. 3 to 6 months worth of your essential expenses. And again, that's what they allude to here. So using that as a baseline, right? I mean, you can ultimately break down what is essential or not. Obviously, there are things out there that are deemed essential when we speak on it, but everyone's different. They might say something is essential for them that's not essential for others, and they include it in that no matter what. Again, that's where it kind of goes back to you. But when we speak on it, we're speaking of the true essential expenses. So with that in mind, the emergency fund, 3 to 6 months, we're starting there, right? That's your savings in the bank. So now let's look at retirement savings or other savings, right? That's meant for maybe investing something else down the road later, etc.
Because I think you always in life need to have some liquidity and surplus emergency funds.
Mm-hmm. You do.
So that's going to be something that might change, going up or down based on where you are in life. But, let's just pretend that kind of stays constant moving forward.
And we're just going to start with the 20s. Right, so we're going to go through kind of some each age gaps here. But again, the article continues to say just how much should I have in my savings by my 20s. So I mentioned back a second ago that they said you should have 1 times your salary by age 30. But they give you some more data to kind of support maybe their reasoning. And they say, quote, households led by someone between the ages of 25 and 34 earn an average of $84,999 a year before taxes. So gross. Let's just call it $85,000. According to that consumer expenditure survey that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Couples in their 20s should have about 1 time their salary socked away in retirement accounts. See, this is where they say retirement accounts at this point, not just the savings. So that's where I wanted to clarify that. And then they break down, again, based on that data, they break down what people in that age band, that 25 to 34 age band, are spending on some of these, sections of their life, categories, yeah. Housing, transportation, food, healthcare, etc. Housing being the most, goes down basically $1,800 to they're spending $976 on transportation, like cars, other things, $662 on food, and then it goes down from there. But essentially it puts it to about $4,200 a month on those essential expenses, going back to that emergency fund. So you look at that, okay. If you're spending $4,200 a month, again, you times that by 6, you're roughly at $24,000 with a little extra change of $200, 6 more, $25,000. Let's just call it roughly. Do you have that? That's liquid, right? That's what's in the bank, cash. That's in addition to anything else you're saving in other places. So you kind of look at that and say, oh, is that something you do have? Is that something you don't have? Are you confident with that? If you're on that track, you're in that ballpark, and you're hitting all these categories, you should feel pretty good for being on track towards retirement. Now, again, like we always say, everyone's situation is different and things can change. So you have to continuously maintain, and that's why you always have to take this seriously and be looking out for these things and watching for them, because things can change, and that could end up having you to dip into these things.
And the emergency funds, as it might sound basic, put 3 to 6 months. We sit down with a lot of individuals in all different stages of life. And, we definitely meet people that do have that. But it's just so important, because if you don't have those funds, and you get laid off, what decisions are you going to have to make that might be different? You might have to just go race out, get the first job you can find, just because you need that payment, you need that income so you can pay your bills, or if you have, the safety net, the liquidity, maybe you could take more of your time and secure the best possible job, and then, be able to spend more time on that process. Or if, your furnace blows out or a roof leaks, do you have that liquid capital, or are you being forced to maybe make bad decisions, like put those things on credit cards, or, taking money out of an IRA and paying, taxes and penalties? So the emergency funds, will save you when things, are bad, potentially. And it also gives you opportunity that maybe if things are bad, like the economy or stock market, and you have, ample savings there and you're feeling confident, it gives you opportunity to maybe use some of that money to take advantage of those times and, buy stocks that are at discount, or if cars are really cheap at that point, or houses, you could go in and maybe change up what you're doing because you have the liquidity at that point.
Yeah, it's just about having the options, because if you don't have the options, then you're limited to whatever you can do. And that goes to a lot of things with personal finance. Having those options is important. It goes to, the diversification, some other things Ryan mentioned too. But, we can say one thing is that if you only have one option, you really can't do much planning other than the planning around that one option. And it doesn't always give you the exact confidence you need, because you only have one route and that's the only route. And it might not always make you happy. So, it's important to start considering these things as life goes on, which is, switching to the next phase, which is how much money should I have saved in my 30s? The next point of the article here. They're talking 35 to 44. So again, you're kind of dipping, just like the last one, we're kind of dipping into the next gap here. But they say, again, quote, those aged 35 to 44 earn an average income of $108,176 before taxes, according to the data. Conventional wisdom states that couples in their 30s should have 3 times that amount saved for retirement. So we go 1 times before, right? So you make $100,000, you should have 100 in your savings
by the time you're 30.
Next one is if you make $100,000, you should have 300,000, saved in your retirement for the same reason. And they go through the monthly expenses, based on those essential expenses again. It's a little bit more, because maybe you've earned more, maybe you've just spent more, maybe it's a more expensive time of your life. You got kids, you got family, some changes are going on, but they're boosting up basically $1,000 more a month, roughly. They add up all those expenses I went through in the last one, and they're saying the data comes to $5,121, which is, again, roughly
your
1,000
net
more
expenses on a monthly basis.
So, man, you got to go through a lot of changes, and that's why saving money early, if you can, does help this a lot, because when you get to this point, you might have been on track, you might have been outpacing, but now things have changed, and that might have eaten away at some of that, and now you might still be on pace, but you're not outpacing anymore. And that earlier stuff is what kind of helped you get here. So, obviously, I know this is more kind of leaning towards what you've been going through, Ryan, more recently. So, I mean, some of these changes throughout this, I mean, how would this affect ultimately the savings, you think, and maybe how it impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, before I jump into that real quick, the other thing I would think that's important, and I would just caution you on, if you're ever just trying to benchmark your financial situation based on just a number like this, how much money you have saved. The reason I would cautious is there are people that do save that amount of money, but if you look at the other side of the sheet, the net worth statement, they might have a lot of liabilities. Maybe they have tons, maybe they have no equity in their house. Maybe they have very expensive, car debts, or still have college student loans, things like that. So, when benchmarking just a dollar amount, say, hey, yeah, I have 1 times my salary, that's meaningless ultimately if you have all these other things, kind of on the other side of the sheet. So, and I think that's the part, a lot of people out there, when you're trying to compare yourself to others, hey, I make a similar amount of money as them, or I have a similar job, and and they're comparing, houses or cars or whatever they're comparing. I mean, that's one of the big problems is you don't know what's behind the, the sheets, and you don't know what kind of debt, or, maybe if they're using every dollar they have available to spend on their lifestyle. You don't know any of those things. So, I always caution about that. But I think, to get into what Andrew is saying, when you start getting into your 30s, you're starting to make some more money. You're starting to feel more comfortable. You start having more weddings and, little bachelor trips and things like that, that you're, probably spending a lot more on disposable type, fun type of expenses, no kids, so you can kind of just get up and go on vacation wherever you want. You're establishing a house, maybe, things like that. You're establishing savings. So what I find is, when you start making all those decisions, especially in your 30s, is to make sure you're, being conservative about how you're going about building your lifestyle. Because a lot of people, as they make more money, they just spend right behind it, and they're never really getting ahead. They have that constant stress because, their expenses just keep going up.
Yeah, that creep is dangerous, and it does happen. And again, it is somewhat natural, and it's not a problem unless you make it a problem. Because if you make more money and you're consistently earning more money, it is okay to spend more money with that too, as long as you're staying on track with these things that we're talking about, and that you're okay with the outcome. And as long as you pay yourself first and take care of the savings goals and all the things you need to do to get there, then if you can spend more and have more fun and all those things, those are good things. I mean, you earn that with success and getting to that point, so you should be able to enjoy it too. But again, it is important to stay on track with that, because it can get out of hand very quickly. And a lot of people do run into trouble with that because they forget, right? You make more money, yep, but you're also gaining tax brackets. You're paying more money in taxes. You have more expenses if you're doing more things, and all, that stuff starts to eat away. And then eventually there's a tipping point where, you're actually, going backwards versus going forwards, even though you've made more money. So just something to note. And then again, naturally, yes, you're starting maybe having kids, or you're starting to get to that point, or maybe your kids are several years old now, they're above toddler stage, and now they're getting into more potentially expensive things, schooling, sports, whatever it is. So that stuff might be eating away as well, and those are important things to consider. So, you can see kind of the trajectory of where they're going here. If we go next to the next section, which is how much savings should I have in my 40s, I mean, you look at this. If I go back to the 30s, what they said, based on the data, which again, it's the data, but it says that age gap of 35 to 44 has an average income of the 108 and some change thousand that I said a second ago. We go now to how much should I save in my 40s. It says 45 to 54 average yearly income is 119,933. So it's like a
smaller bump.
Yeah, 9,000 more. And you're basically going through, so essentially, again, you've basically gone through now 2 periods of income virtually staying around the same if you are on track with the average. The monthly essential expenses are similar. They're slightly higher, but they're similar. So again, you look at that day and you say, okay, well, again, assuming that the data is true and accurate, you look at that day and you say, wow, so you're in a span of time where, essentially the income doesn't grow a whole lot. The expenses don't grow a whole lot either,
or the expenses are going up and your income's really not going up to keep pace.
Correct. But you look at this and it says their goal here is to have 6 times their earnings in the retirement accounts.
By the time you're 50.
So you look at that and you say, okay, again, I go back. Income virtually the same. Yeah, a little bump, $9,000 on the average. Expenses $150 a month more, not anything crazy. So very similar. But again, you went from 3 to 6 times in the retirement, right? Basically in one age gap.
And some of that's compound interest that you'd be earning during that time period.
Assuming that you're getting solid rates of return and you're either taking very good care of it and watching it, or you're working with a solid team, that is helping you do it, right? That's assuming some of that too. So yes, the growth in those investments is some of that compounding growth on that to turn it to 3 to 6. But again, that would be essentially doubling the money, in a decade, which is achievable, but not guaranteed. And something that, again, you have to consider. So if you're not saving a whole lot of money and you're really relying on investment performance to do that for you, it's just something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I think, too, if you look at the 40s, entering your 40s or being at the end of your 40s, you're already halfway through your working career. I mean, unless you want to work into your 70s or 80s, you might only have 15, 20 years left if you want to, retire in your 60s. So I think in your 40s, you better have your house in order. I mean, at that point, you need to have a strategy on how you're saving, how you're, handling things within your cash flow, having a financial plan. Now you've accumulated some of those assets. They're saying, you should have 6 times your income at that point. So you got to start doing things to protect those monies, that you've worked hard to save. And then you're also getting in a crunch in your 40s where, if you did choose to have kids, coming up pretty soon, they're going to start entering college and things that, are going to require more money, if you're going to help them. So I think the 40s, I think you should have a financial plan and be checking in all the time. But, at the 40s, you got to really pay attention to those things. And I think also something super important to do in your 40s, is make sure the way you're saving money, is diversified. I see a lot of people, they just start getting into their, 401k and they start saving, and that's the only way they save is, into the 401k, which is great. You accumulate money that way. But if that's the only money you have in retirement, there's no tax planning that can be done. You just have to pull the money out of the IRA in retirement and pay the taxes that are due. So, I think the 40s is critical to look at, after-tax savings, looking at Roth savings, looking at HSA savings, looking at, hey, I've been saving in this way for a while. Should I be changing? Because in your 40s, you only have so much time that even if you make a change to really make an impact, and I think you can make an adequate impact in your 40s. So, that's something I would really be paying attention to.
And, that's why, again, some of these articles are great for just getting a kind of blanketed high-level benchmarks for you just to kind of start to get on track to. But, something like Ryan just said, again, like college costs, those education costs, like those sort of things, that's not listed in these
nowhere in here
essential expenses, right? Because technically they're not essential, right? When you think about it, you can have your kid pay for it. Maybe that's not a goal of yours though. So, when you add that kind of stuff onto here, right? Or, what, I want to have, I want to increase my lifestyle in retirement. I've gone to work. I've done all this. I've saved all this money. I've helped kids through college. I've done all these things. Now it's time for me to enjoy
my time.
Well, maybe that means your lifestyle is increasing by 1.5 times what you usually spend or something. Who knows? But that stuff isn't in any of here, right? So you have to factor that in when you're talking about, $5,200 a month. That's not, those are the essential expenses. And okay, I've got this taken care of. Well, there's other things that are goal oriented that might be different for you here. So,
and they can take away from potential savings. I mean, if you have those extra costs and you're not accounting for them, eventually you're going to have to lower your savings, and then you could possibly get behind. And then once those expenses go away, the kids are off the payroll, then all of a sudden you're scrambling and, doing double time saving and maybe cutting costs and trying to position yourself best for retirement.
And that really goes to the next one, which is how much do I need to save in my 50s, right? You're starting to talk about retirement. It's kind of interesting here because on the article it says it's how much do I need to save in my 50s. It says it's time to wind down. I mean, when they talk about 50s, they're saying 55 to 64. That's the time frame. So again, I kind of lean that more towards the retirement age-ish. But, it says time to wind down. You've probably moved on from the most stressful period of your career, potentially, whether voluntary or not. And now you're prepared for the last third of your life in retirement. That's why earnings and spending start to fall. So they say that 55 to 64 average yearly income from the data is $98,793. So that has basically decreased by $20,000 from the one I just gave you last decade. And once you get into your 50s, you want to have saved at least 8 times for retirement. Now, that's why this data, I think, for me is interesting because I feel like if you are still working at 55 in this age gap, that your income would be the highest.
I would think it would be peak earnings, so I disagree with that.
Yeah, so I don't know what, maybe they're factoring people who've retired early and now they have zero income, so that's
for sure
lowering that down. I'm not sure because I would say this is the only one that I kind of argue against because, again, if you're working 55 to 64, you would hope by that point you're at the peak of your earning career, right?
And the thing I disagree too is I don't really see the spending starting to fall in the 50s. I mean,
no.
If you're lucky enough to get past the kids and all that expenses, typically there's some deferred stuff. Maybe it's stuff around the house. Maybe you've been being cheap on vacations or whatever you like to spend money on. And I find a lot of people, once they kind of get over that hurdle, and now it's, hey, I got to, take care of myself too a little. I've been, really tight lately. So I kind of disagree with the expenses falling down in the 50s.
Yeah, and again, everyone's different, but naturally, from what we see, at least, there's no necessarily data out there to support it. But what we typically see is that as people get closer to retirement, and then into retirement in the first 5 to maybe even 10 years, that it kind of works like a bell curve, meaning that people spend more as they get to that stage. And then they kind of peak at whatever age that is. 10 years in retirement maybe is a good benchmark for that. And then it starts to slow down, right? So you do like the bell curve. That's typically what we see. Again, we don't have any data to support that, but when we see that happening, that's more realistic, at least from who the people we're dealing with. Meaning again that they're kind of peaked their earnings at this point. They're spending their lifestyle of what they really like to spend because they're making their good money. Maybe they've got all the kids through the stuff they need to, and now they're kind of peaking, or they're still kind of peaking. And then they naturally start to slow down in retirement after they've done some of the things that they want to do, which, again, 5-10 years or something down the road. That's more along the lines of what I see. So this would kind of be the only one I disagree with. But the one thing I do agree with that they say here is, it says at least 8 times for retirement. So again, I go back to kind of the same point I made on the last one. If your income is going down for whatever reason, you're really relying on savings, maxing the savings, I guess, and rate of return to get it to 8 times, of your salary. So expenses go down, they say. Again, I think that's like Ryan and I stated. I don't know if that's necessarily true from what we see, but again, you go back to the savings goal, 8 times your salary of what you make. That's what they say you should have at least by that time, to put you on a good benchmark for retirement.
And just a market cycle could totally change that. If you're doing this measurement and the stock market's down 20%, you got to take that into consideration too. Or if the market's up at all-time highs and you're, judging your account based off that.
Yeah, and that's why you can go so deep into these, and that's why again, these articles serve a purpose, and it's to give a high level overview. And so going through and nitpicking every little thing would kind of be against the point of this, because at the end of the day, there's good information in here to at least relate to. But you have to always remember that truly This is why I drill it into everyone's head that your situation is different, because everyone has different goals of what they want to do with their money in their life. And that changes a lot of these benchmarks ultimately. On this same article, there's kind of like a subsection of it that says like other common savings goals, which is, going back to some of the things we said. They talk about education and opening up separate savings accounts for other expenses, right? Some people, like if they know they want to do a $10,000 vacation every year, they, stack the previous year or whatever, their time frame is, they're saving an additional couple $100 a month into this separate account. And then that separate account gets wiped every year for the vacation the next year.
It's a placeholder.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do that are strategic in that sense. Some people, you talk about this, some people, it would just literally be impossible to have savings of 1 times their salary by their 30 because they have so much student loan debt that they're focusing on getting, or other types of debt that they're getting, focused paid off first. That's not really having 1 times your salary and earning, or, at 30. But the way you look at that is, okay, if you chunk that down and got that done, you got to look at how much you paid off and how much that increased your net worth. And that kind of is like having 1 time salary, right? In any sense. So there's some things, right, that get in the way of that.
And if you miss one of those decades of saving because life gets in the way and expenses get in the way, that definitely makes a huge impact too.
It does. I mean, just look at this. I mean, they talk about some of the education statistics in here, and they say the cost to graduate and it's in an entirely new level. Which some of these numbers when we build out financial plans,
inflation
and you look
has been so high.
It's actually starting to get crazy how much money it actually does cost to go to school. But they say here, according to the National Center of Education Statistics, average tuition and fees for the 2020-21 school year, we're in 23-24 school year, and it's gone up since here. I can tell you that. It's saying $54,501 for students living on campus at a nonprofit private college, so expensive, and then $25,707 for in-state students living on campus at a public college. So, that second one, for example, we're in Michigan, that'd be like going to Michigan State, right?
And that doesn't include the car,
nope,
the insurance, Mom, Dad, I need some money to party, and all those other little things.
St. Patty's Day, big time.
St. Pat, I don't have any money. It's St.
I look at this. I was in state. I was in Michigan. I went to the University of Dayton. Go Flyers, by the way. And that's more on the first one, right? I lived on campus on an out-of-state private college. You look at that right now for 2020, 2021, $54,501. Yes, kid could have scholarship, other things that help with that, certainly. But you look at that cost, I've done these calculations on my calculator before when you factor in with the cost of inflation on tuition specifically, and then like assuming rate of return and how much money you would actually have to save every year to account for the full college tuition of 4 years, it'll blow your mind.
Yeah, you guys save probably $12,000, $15,000 a year for a lot of years.
So part of planning is about having these conversations, about having the goal, and then also setting fair expectations, because it's also a good thing for people to be transparent and honest with yourselves, and also for us to be honest with you of, are these things achievable, right? Because part of goal setting, right, is putting things that are achievable far enough where you have to work for them. They're not easy, but they're still achievable. And so you look at some of these things and then you start to gauge what is really essential for you, what's important for you. And that's how you can go a little bit deeper into these savings types of goals. How much should I be saving? Am I on track, right? Because then you kind of benchmark against yourself. And that's ultimately what you really want to do, is look at where you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, where you want to be 5 years, 3 years, whatever it is in the future. And are you on pace with that? Right? That's essentially where we try to get people to get to, because then you focus on yourself and you focus on what you want, which ultimately is the most important thing.
Spend the time on your plan. Don't spend your time on trying to benchmark where you are to the average person in America.
No, it causes some discrepancies in the data ultimately, when all that matters is really your data. So, but these are some great. We'll share the article. There's a lot of great information in here. Again. Just naturally by doing what we do, we could argue some of these points just based on specific individual situations, but this is supposed to be high level and it's supposed to be, blanketed so that you can get a baseline. And I think for that purpose, it does a great job for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
One closing point I want to make here, which I think was a great point, probably one of the best I've seen in an article, is they say automate as much as possible. I cannot stress this enough. I know Ryan here will stress it many times because he does, and it's true. Having the automation and then formulating your life around the automation is very powerful because it puts things on autopilot, and then you yourself mentally can start to just formulate yourself around that automation. People just naturally, let's be honest with ourselves, are not naturally disciplined enough all the time to just do these things. Sometimes things come up and it's going to be the easiest thing to take as an excuse and say, oh, I won't do it this month, but I'll double it next month or whatever it is. Normally it doesn't happen. I'll tell you. I have myself fallen victim to that myself, and I have to go back and backtrack and catch up because it just sometimes if you don't have it automated, you either forgot or something came up, and it's always easy to pull levers to figure out and cause an excuse. But if you get on dollar cost averaging, you're funding your 401k, you're putting money into that separate account, even if it's a separate bank account, every month you get your paycheck and you just throw $300 up into a high yield savings or something else. Just getting that automation, mentally, that $300, that $500, whatever it is coming out. That's going to happen, and treat it as if that's an expense that's going out. Formulate, pay yourself first. I do really like that point, and I think it's a great one to consider.
And I mean, if you're fortunate enough where your income continues to climb, one of the things I think is a little trap out there is people will max their 401k and think like that they don't need to save beyond that, but if you're getting used to a certain type of lifestyle and you're maxing out that 401k from a percentage of income that maybe you should be saving, you might be falling short with that. So like Andrew said, if you have another side account outside of the 401k that you've done the calculations, you say, hey, I want to save 50 grand a year, 23 of it's going to the 401k, and then, you do the math and see what you need to be putting in that other type of account on a monthly basis. And then you evaluate that every year. And if, your income continues to grow, then maybe your savings should grow right behind that.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I'll tell you again, from both experience of what we do and also personally doing it, it really is the best way to save. If you rely on the bonus coming in at the end of the year or whatever to cover the shortfall of what you didn't do throughout the year, you start playing that game. Yeah, it might work for you. Not everyone's different. It might work for you, but for a normal average person, the automation is what helps and causes the discipline to keep things going.
Just makes it happen.
And makes it the savings happen so that you are hitting these benchmarks that we talked about. Again, thanks, Ryan. Yeah. Appreciate it. Great subject. And we appreciate everybody listening and hope that you found some of this information valuable and hopefully you can apply it to your situation. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon. See you later. Disclosure. Ryan Kuss, President, Financial Planner. Alexander Dinzer, Managing Director, Financial Planner. Andrew Henricks, Financial Planner. Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Tax planning services offered by Horizon Advisors. Tax and accounting services provided by Horizon Advisors CPA. Cetera Advisor Networks nor any of its representatives do not provide tax nor accounting services. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities. Due to volatility within the markets, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Investors cannot invest directly in indexes. The performance of any index is not indicative of the performance of any investment and does not take account the effects of inflation, and the fees and expenses associated with investing. A diversified portfolio does not assure a profit or protect against loss in a declining market. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will be successful. Distributions from traditional IRAs and employer-sponsored retirement plans are taxed as ordinary income and, if taken prior to reaching age 59.5, may be subject to an additional 10% IRS tax penalty. Converting from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA is a taxable event. A Roth IRA offers a tax-free withdrawals on taxable contributions. To qualify for the tax-free and penalty-free withdrawal of earnings, a Roth IRA must be in place for at least 5 tax years, and the distribution must take place after age 59.5 or due to death, disability, or a first-time home purchase up to a $10,000 lifetime maximum. Depending on state law, Roth IRA distributions may be subject to state taxes. There is a surrender charge imposed generally during the first 5 to 7 years that you own the contract in an annuity. Withdrawals prior to age 59.5 may result in a 10% IRS tax penalty in addition to any ordinary income tax. The guarantee of the annuity is backed by the financial strength of the underlying insurance company. Investment sub-account values will fluctuate with changes in market conditions. An investment in a variable annuity involves investment risk, including possible loss of principal. Variable annuities are designed for long-term investing. The contract, when redeemed, may be worth more or less than the total amount you invested. Variable annuities are subject to insurance-related charges, including mortality and expense charges, administrative fees, and the expenses associated with the underlying sub-accounts. Investing in mutual funds is subject to risk and loss of principal. There is no assurance or certainty that any investment strategy will be successful in meeting its objectives. Variable annuities, exchange-traded funds, and mutual funds are sold by prospectus only. Investors should consider the investment objectives, risks, and charges and expenses of the variable annuity, mutual fund, or ETF carefully before investing. The prospectus contains this and other information about the product. Contact Alexander Dinzer at 5455 Corporate Drive, Suite 210, Troy, Michigan, 48098 or 248-265-6662 to obtain a prospectus, which should be read carefully before investing or sending money. Again, Horizon Advisors, 5455 Corporate Drive, Suite 210, Michigan, 48098.